So now the left endpoint for the first subdomain is at x equals -2. The right endpoint for the first subdomain is at x equals 1. The left endpoint is at x equals -2. The right endpoint is at x equals 1. So then, what are the corresponding outputs for this rule here? Well, here x gets squared by the f function to get the output. F squares the input to get the output. So for x equals -2, what's y going to be? Y is going to be the square of -2, or +4. Which means that the corresponding left endpoint will be the point -2, 4. So that's going to be the left endpoint of this piece of the graph. Now, will it be included or excluded from the graph? Well, x equals -2 is in the subdomain for this first rule. Because of that bar there, that weak inequality, this point will be included. Put that in green. So the left endpoint will be included on the graph. The right endpoint of the subdomain is at x equals 1. So we're going to plug in 1 for x. Now hold on. Some of you might be saying, 1 is not technically in the subdomain here. Good point. Literally, good point. But here's the thing. Let's plug in x equals 1 anyway. So the corresponding right endpoint will have y coordinate 1 squared, which will be 1. The corresponding right endpoint will then be 1, 1. But now wait a minute. X equals 1, look at that parenthesis, look at the lack of a bar there. We have a strict inequality. X equals 1 is technically not in the subdomain up here, this first subdomain. So the right endpoint, for now, is excluded from this first piece of the graph. The first subdomain just barely misses x equals 1. 1, 1, that right endpoint is excluded. Now you might be wondering, well, wait a minute. By what right do we have to plug in x equals 1 in the first place to even get the y coordinate of the endpoint? Well, here's the deal. It's an idea of a limit in calculus. If you plug in x equals 0.9, x equals 0.99, x equals 0.999, well, the function values, the y coordinates would be the squares of those. As x approaches 1, we're approaching 1 squared. As x approaches 1 from the left, from inside this subdomain, as x approaches 1 from the left, going along that piece, we're approaching 1 squared, or 1, the y coordinate here. It's a limit idea. On this parabola, here's the point 1, 1. Now, for now, the point 1, 1 is not on the graph, but as we walk along this piece of the parabola we're picking up, we're approaching that point. We're approaching that point, even though this point for now is not on the graph. So for now, it's excluded. Now, it remains to be seen whether the second piece here will pick up the point 1, 1. Sometimes the second piece will pick up the point 1, 1, and we actually have continuity at x equals 1. But let's see. Do we get continuity or not? We'll see next time.